The Concept of Nature by Alfred North Whitehead. Quotes. The Concept of Nature. Alfred North Whitehead presents his exploration of the relationship between thought and the natural world. This work, originally delivered as a series of lectures, critically examines the philosophical foundations of how we understand nature, emphasizing the significance of experience, time, and space in shaping our perceptions. Whitehead challenges traditional distinctions such as the bifurcation between appearance and reality, advocating for a more integrated view that sees nature as directly experienced, rather than as something wholly separate from our awareness. His approach merges scientific and philosophical perspectives, offering readers a new way to think about the connection between the observer and the observed. Quote 1. What is the philosophy of the sciences? It is not a bad answer to say that it is the study of the relations between the different departments of knowledge. This quote encapsulates the fundamental aim of philosophical inquiry within the sciences, to explore and articulate the connections, and sometimes the lack thereof, between various branches of scientific knowledge. The philosophy of science seeks to uncover how these disciplines interact or stand alone, shedding light on the broader implications of scientific work and its influence on other knowledge domains. Quote 2. Natural science is exclusively concerned with homogeneous thoughts about nature. This statement delineates the scope of natural science as concerned solely with objective, empirical observations of the natural world, disregarding the subjective elements of human thought. It underscores a methodological commitment to a form of thinking about nature that does not include reflections on the act of thinking itself, thus aiming for a purely objective understanding. Quote 3. Nature is that which we observe in perception through the senses. In this sense perception, we are aware of something which is not thought, and which is self-contained for thought. This quote asserts that nature, as perceived through the senses, exists independently of our thoughts about it. The objective reality of nature is presented as something that can be observed without the necessity of being filtered through subjective human thought processes, establishing a foundation for scientific inquiry that seeks to understand nature as it is, not merely as it is thought to be. Quote 4. The philosophy of the sciences, conceived as one subject, is the endeavor to exhibit all sciences as one science, or, in case of defeat, the disproof of such a possibility. This reflects on the ambitious philosophical goal to either unify all scientific disciplines under a single comprehensive framework, or to demonstrate conclusively that such unification is impossible. This pursuit shapes much of philosophical discourse, which oscillates between seeking universal truths and acknowledging the distinctiveness of each scientific field. Quote 5. The values of nature are perhaps the key to the metaphysical synthesis of existence. This proposition suggests that understanding the inherent values observed in nature could lead to a more profound metaphysical understanding of existence itself. It implies that nature's empirical realities might offer insights into more abstract philosophical questions about the nature of reality and our place within it. Quote 6. No characteristic of nature which is immediately posited for knowledge by sense awareness can be explained. Highlighting the limits of human cognition, this quote suggests that certain aspects of nature, as directly experienced through sense awareness, remain fundamentally inexplicable with current human thought and scientific methods. This underlines a boundary in our understanding, where the direct sensory experience of nature presents qualities that are resistant to complete intellectual comprehension or explanation. Quote 7. The process of discrimination in sense awareness has two distinct sides. There is the discrimination of fact into parts, and the discrimination of any part of fact as exhibiting relations to entities which are not parts of fact, though they are ingredients in it. This quote highlights the dual nature of sense awareness, emphasizing how humans process sensory information by breaking down overall experiences into individual components and identifying their interrelations. The discernment of distinct parts within a perceived fact allows for a deeper understanding of how individual elements contribute to the whole, enabling a more nuanced comprehension of the environment. Quote 8. A natural entity is merely a factor of fact, considered in itself. Its disconnection from the complex of fact is a mere abstraction. In this statement, the notion that what we perceive as distinct natural entities are actually inseparable components of a larger reality is explored. This perspective challenges the common scientific practice of abstracting entities from their contextual environments, advocating for a more holistic approach to understanding nature where entities are not isolated but seen as integral parts of a unified whole. Quote 9. The first task of a philosophy of science should be some general classification of the entities disclosed to us in sense perception. This quote asserts that before delving deeper into scientific inquiry, there should be an effort to categorize the entities that are perceptible to us. This foundational step is crucial because it sets the stage for all subsequent scientific investigations, ensuring that the study of these entities is systematic and coherent. Quote 10. The history of the doctrine of matter has yet to be written. It is the history of the influence of Greek philosophy on science. Here, the profound impact of Greek philosophical traditions on the conceptualization of matter within the scientific realm is acknowledged. This influence is so significant that the evolution of the concept of matter can be seen as a historical narrative that intertwines philosophical thought with scientific discovery, suggesting that our modern understanding of matter is deeply rooted in ancient philosophical ideas. Quote 11. Matter, in its modern scientific sense, is a return to the Ionian effort to find in space and time some stuff which composes nature. This quote connects contemporary scientific notions of matter to ancient Ionian philosophies, which also sought to identify the fundamental substances that constitute reality. It implies that modern science, despite its advancements, continues to grapple with questions that are as old as the earliest speculations about the natural world, reflecting a continuous philosophical quest to understand the material substrate of the universe. Quote 12. The bifurcation of nature into two systems of reality, which, insofar as they are real in different senses, is exactly what scientific philosophers do when they are driven into a corner and convicted of incoherence. This quote criticizes the concept of bifurcation in nature, where nature is divided into the reality of scientific investigation, like particles and waves, and the reality of human experience, like colors and sounds. The author suggests that this division often arises not from a true understanding of nature, but from a philosophical struggle to maintain coherence in scientific explanation when traditional frameworks fail to explain observed phenomena. Quote 13. We do not ask about the percipient or about the process, but about the perceived. Here, the focus is shifted away from the observer and the process of observation to the object being observed. This emphasizes a foundational approach in the philosophy of science that seeks to understand the characteristics of what is directly perceived in nature, rather than being clouded by the complexities of how it is perceived or who is perceiving it. Quote 14. The whole notion of a metaphysical interpretation as an illegitimate importation into the philosophy of natural science underlines a strict delineation between what can be empirically verified and what falls into the realm of speculative metaphysics. This statement reflects a purist view that the philosophy of science should remain strictly within the bounds of empirical evidence and observable phenomena, avoiding the intrusion of metaphysical speculations that cannot be directly related to empirical data. Quote 15. What I am essentially protesting against is the bifurcation of nature into two systems of reality. This quote directly challenges the separation of nature into a physical, scientifically observable reality and a psychological or experiential reality as perceived by humans. The author argues against viewing these as fundamentally different, suggesting instead a more integrated understanding of nature that encompasses both human experiences and the physical laws governing them. Quote 16. There can be no explanation of the why of knowledge. We can only describe the what of knowledge. Here, the author argues against the pursuit of metaphysical explanations within the philosophy of science, suggesting that such efforts lead away from practical and verifiable scientific inquiry. Instead, the focus should be on describing and understanding the observable phenomena themselves, rather than delving into the unanswerable questions about the nature of knowledge or existence. Quote 17. This refusal to countenance any theory of psychic additions to the object known in perception is a rejection of the bifurcation of nature into the observed and the observer, focusing instead on a unified view of nature as it is presented to us. In this assertion, the author rejects the idea that perceptions add subjective elements to the objective reality of nature, advocating for a perspective that views all of nature, including human perceptions of it, as a singular, unified reality. This approach challenges views that separate the observer from the observed, promoting a holistic understanding of how we interact with and interpret the natural world. Quote 18. We are instinctively willing to believe that by due attention, more can be found in nature than that which is observed at first sight. The quote captures a fundamental aspect of scientific inquiry and human curiosity: the belief that a deeper understanding of nature is possible beyond initial observations. This innate drive fuels continuous exploration and learning, pushing the boundaries of current knowledge. Quote 19. We perceive one unit factor in nature, and this factor is that something is going on then, there. This quote emphasizes the core perception in nature, which is the ongoing activity or event occurring at a specific time and place. It highlights the essential unity in our perception of nature, where distinct temporal and spatial elements combine to form a singular, continuous event that we recognize and respond to. Quote 20. Events are the field of a two-termed relation, namely the relation of extension, which was considered in the last lecture. Here, the emphasis is on defining events within nature through their relational structure, specifically through the concept of extension. This relation allows events to be understood in terms of their spatial and temporal scope, offering a way to categorize and comprehend how events encompass or are encompassed by other events, forming a continuous narrative in the natural world. Quote 21. The continuity of nature is the continuity of events. This statement asserts that the seamless flow and progression of natural phenomena are fundamentally a series of interconnected events. It highlights the importance of viewing nature not as a static backdrop, but as a vibrant tapestry woven from the ongoing interactions and extensions of events. Quote 22. An object is an entity of a different type from an event. The distinction drawn here between objects and events is crucial for understanding how static or persistent elements, objects, differ from occurrences or actions, events, within nature. While objects may have a consistent identity over time, events are characterized by their dynamic nature, encompassing changes and processes that objects do not inherently possess. Quote 23. The topic for this lecture is the continuation of the task of explaining the construction of spaces as abstracts from the facts of nature. This quote underscores the central theme of the lecture, which involves elucidating how conceptual spaces are derived from observable natural phenomena. This foundational task in the philosophy of natural science seeks to link theoretical constructs of space with tangible empirical evidence, enhancing our understanding of how abstract concepts like space directly relate to the natural world. Quote 24. We note that event particles have position in respect to each other. Here, the focus is on the spatial relationships between event particles, which are fundamental components in the structure of nature as conceived in this theoretical framework. Position is defined through the interactions and relationships event particles have with each other, reflecting a deeper layer of complexity in how we understand spatial arrangements in nature. Quote 25. Let E be any given event. The manifold of event particles falls into three sets in reference to E. This statement delves into the categorization of event particles based on their relationship to a specific event, E. It highlights a methodological approach in which event particles are classified as either inside, outside, or on the boundary of an event, thus providing a structural understanding of events in terms of their constituent parts. Quote 26. A three-dimensional locus of event particles, which is the common portion of the boundary of two adjoined events, will be called a solid. In this quote, the concept of a solid is defined within the framework of the theory, illustrating how theoretical constructs are used to categorize and understand the relationships between events and their spatial boundaries. This classification is vital for advancing a systematic understanding of spatial dimensions in natural science. Quote 27. The aim of this lecture is to establish a theory of congruence. This statement sets the stage for a deep exploration into the nature of congruence as it relates to both space and time. Congruence, which traditionally involves the idea of sameness or equivalence in geometry and measurement, is re-evaluated to understand how it applies to the fundamental properties of the physical universe, integrating concepts of space, time, and motion. Quote 28. Congruence is a controversial question. It is the theory of measurement in space and in time. Here, congruence is presented as a complex and debated topic within the philosophy of science, emphasizing its role as a foundational concept for measuring and comparing distances and intervals not only spatially, but also temporally. This underscores the challenge of defining congruence beyond simple numerical equality, linking it to the physical realities perceived through scientific observation. Quote 29. Immediate judgments of congruence are presupposed in measurement, and the process of measurement is merely a procedure to extend the recognition of congruence to cases where these immediate judgments are not available. This quote clarifies that our fundamental understanding of measurement depends on an assumed ability to recognize when objects or intervals are congruent, which is to say, the same in some respect. Measurements extend this basic perceptual judgment into more complex or less immediately apparent scenarios, highlighting the deep reliance on congruence in all forms of quantitative assessment. Quote 30. Poincaré's position is a strong one. He, in effect, challenges anyone to point out any factor in nature which gives a preeminent status to the congruence relation which mankind has actually adopted. Poincaré's challenge, as detailed here, questions the basis on which specific congruence relations are chosen and universally accepted within scientific practice. This philosophical inquiry probes whether there are inherent qualities in nature that dictate these choices, or if they are instead determined by human convention and practicality, suggesting a deeper reflection on the foundations of scientific knowledge. Quote 31. The ensuing lecture is concerned with the theory of objects. Objects are elements in nature which do not pass. This quote introduces the primary focus of the lecture, which centers on understanding objects within the context of nature. Objects are defined as persistent elements that do not partake in the transient flow of events, a definition that sets the stage for exploring how objects interact with the dynamic aspects of nature through recognition and ingression. Quote 32. Recognition is an awareness of sameness, but to call recognition an awareness of sameness implies an intellectual act of comparison accompanied with judgment. This statement explores the concept of recognition, distinguishing it from mere perception by highlighting its dependence on the intellectual activities of comparison and judgment. Recognition is framed not just as a sensory awareness, but as a deeper cognitive process that identifies and reaffirms the constancy or sameness of objects across different contexts in nature. Quote 33. An object is an ingredient in the character of some event. In fact, the character of an event is nothing but the objects which are ingredient in it, and the ways in which those objects make their ingression into the event. Here, the intrinsic link between objects and events is articulated, suggesting that objects are not only components of events, but actually define their character through the process of ingression. This relationship underscores the foundational role of objects in shaping the phenomena observed in nature. Quote 34. You may have noticed that I am using the term ingression to denote the general relation of objects to events. The concept of ingression is clarified in this quote, identifying it as the mechanism through which objects influence or participate in events. Ingression describes how the presence and characteristics of objects help to shape the unfolding of events, emphasizing the interconnectedness of all elements within the framework of nature. Quote 35. There is a general agreement that Einstein's investigations have one fundamental merit, irrespective of any criticisms which we may feel inclined to pass on them. They have made us think. This quote emphasizes the significant impact of Einstein's theories, highlighting their ability to stimulate thought and challenge existing scientific paradigms. It sets the tone for a discussion that encourages critical engagement with new ideas, underscoring the importance of intellectual exploration in scientific progress. Quote 36. To put ourselves in the position to assimilate and to criticize any change in ultimate scientific conceptions, we must begin at the beginning. Here, the necessity of foundational understanding in scientific inquiry is stressed, advocating for a thorough comprehension of basic principles before addressing more complex or revolutionary ideas. This approach ensures that criticisms and adaptations of new theories are well informed and grounded in a solid understanding of established knowledge. Quote 37. Nature is known to us in our experience as a complex of passing events. This statement defines nature fundamentally as a series of events, each with its own set of characteristics and interrelations. It reflects a dynamic view of the natural world, where understanding is predicated on recognizing the temporal and spatial contexts within which natural phenomena occur. Quote 38. The concrete facts of nature are events exhibiting a certain structure in their mutual relations and certain characters of their own. By defining the facts of nature as structured and characterized events, this quote underscores the organized complexity of natural phenomena. It highlights the dual aspects of understanding nature, grasping the intrinsic qualities of events and comprehending the systematic relationships that connect them. Quote 39. We must avoid vicious bifurcation. Nature is nothing else than the deliverance of sense awareness. This quote emphasizes the necessity of viewing nature as a seamless whole, perceived through sense awareness without artificial separations into subjective and objective components. It criticizes the dualistic approach often found in philosophical thought, advocating for a unified view that fully integrates human perception with the physical world. Quote 40. Our knowledge of nature is an experience of activity, or passage. The things previously observed are active entities, the events. Here, nature is described as a dynamic process comprised of events, each actively participating in the ongoing evolution of the physical world. This perspective frames natural phenomena not as static entities, but as active components in a continuous flow, highlighting the intrinsic motion and change that characterizes the physical universe. Quote 41. Nature is a structure of events, and each event has its position in this structure and its own peculiar character or quality. This statement further elaborates on the nature of events, underscoring that each one possesses a unique set of characteristics and a specific position within the overall structure of nature. It conveys the idea that understanding nature involves discerning both the individual qualities of events and their interrelations within a larger system. Quote 42. The relation of extending over is the relation of including, either in a spatial or in a temporal sense, or in both. By defining the fundamental relation of extension as one of inclusion, whether spatial, temporal, or both, this quote provides a foundational concept for understanding how events are interconnected within the framework of nature. It introduces a basic principle for analyzing how different events relate to each other, shaping the structure of the natural world. The concept of nature invites readers to rethink the assumptions that underlie our understanding of the physical world. Whitehead's discussion of time, space, and the interrelatedness of all events leads to a more holistic perspective on nature, one that refuses to separate mind from the material universe. Through this exploration, Whitehead not only offers a critique of traditional scientific materialism, but also lays the groundwork for a more cohesive and dynamic concept of reality. His reflections remind us that our understanding of the world is always evolving, and that nature, in its full complexity, is an adventure of thought as much as of science.
Curious to dive into the mind of Alfred North Whitehead? With StudyLab Pro's book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of the concept of nature in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo, and if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.